What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here, and today we're going to be talking about the housing shortage, the housing crisis, whatever you really want to label it as. Obviously, it's making lots of the rounds in the news these days in regards to the different political parties and all their different campaign promises. In fact, this Friday, I'm going to have a video dropping with myself and Josh and Aaron from the Finlay Mortgage team, where we're going to really dive deep into the different campaign promises being made by several of the political parties here in Canada. But I thought before even leading into that video on Friday, let's first talk about what I see as two of the biggest issues when it comes to Canadian housing and the affordability crisis that we're currently facing. So one of the first things you'll see is a lot of campaign promises involve, we're going to build this many houses in this many years, we're going to do this, that, and the other. And while some of those things may help alleviate some of the pressure, I don't see any of these as a silver bullet. Now, realistically, there probably is no silver bullet or no silver bullet that's going to be palatable to everyone. But I think there are some bigger opportunities here to make a greater dent in the affordability crisis. And that's what I really want to explore with you guys today. So I said there's kind of two pieces I see here. The first piece, we're not going to cover very long. And then the second one, we'll get into NIMBYs. I'm curious if you guys know what NIMBYs are already. So let me know in the comment section. Do you know what NIMBY stands for? But before talking about NIMBYs, I think one of the big ways that you could solve the affordability or the housing crisis is if you were to dramatically change the way we lend and borrow when it comes to real estate, and particularly if you were to change the interest rates. Now, that would pretty much implode our modern economy to the best of my knowledge. I don't think that any economist is going to really push for that, especially in these unusual times. So that feels like it's almost just off the table. So we might as well just move on to talking about the other silver bullet that I think could still potentially work and hopefully not cause a catastrophic collapse of our economic system. And that's talking about NIMBYs. And so NIMBY stands for not in my backyard. And essentially, the whole concept here is people that are trying to slow down or restrict a community's growth, its intensification, right? And so we'll high level first just kind of explore why does this happen, and then why it's so important that we actually get over ourselves and not any of us be NIMBYs. So usually two of the ways that you'll often see NIMBYism occur is one, when a new development's proposed. So sometimes you'll see, that vacant lot that's been in the neighborhood for years, some developer or some real estate investor comes in and they want to build a low rise or a high rise or a mid rise apartment building. And so this happens all the time here in London, Ontario. In fact, I can remember multiple projects being proposed on Fanshawe Park Road on the north end of the city that were going to be kind of mid-density residential developments. And boy, do you want to see rich people freak out? You try and put, mid-level density properties near them, and you will see rich people lose their goddamn shit. Same with it comes to intensification. So in a lot of older neighborhoods, oftentimes they can be, valuable or expensive neighborhoods, high desirability. They're often on bigger lots than what we have today, right? So here in London, it's not unusual to find in some of the older neighborhoods lots that might have 70 or 100 feet of frontage and have a depth of greater than 100 feet as well. So we're often looking at like a good chunk of land. If we're dealing with 100 by 100, that's like a quarter of an acre, right? If you're dealing with 100 feet frontage and 200 feet depth, that's essentially half an acre property. And depending upon the rules around what you can build there, you can actually fit a lot on a half acre property. But that's neither here nor there. Where NIMBYs come into play is losing their shit whenever someone wants to intensify the density of a neighborhood. So oftentimes what this looks like is someone wants to build a garden suite. Remember Colby Marshall from the YouTube channel? He's our Barrie and Aurelia real estate expert. Well, that's kind of his bread and butter of one of his business models is building these garden suites. Honestly, we don't cover it a lot on the YouTube channel because it's just kind of negativity and it's not really that productive. But the number of neighbors that freak out when someone wants to build a carriage home, a garden suite, even when someone wants to just add a basement apartment, right? When they're looking to create a secondary dwelling, a lot of neighbors will lose their shit. They'll literally start petitions. They'll start signs. They'll go to every city council member. And it's insane to hear the arguments they make, right? They make it sound like a renter is some sort of evil person that's just going to destroy both their house value as well as the tranquility of their neighborhood. And that's complete bullshit. It literally is. And one of the things we need to understand is if you really want to create a lot more housing stock, if you want to create a lot more apartment stock, one of the fastest ways to do it would be allow people to turn their existing houses into multifamily dwellings. Now, this doesn't mean that you just let them build it in any way or construct it in any way. you can still have building codes around it. You can still have, fire separation and all the other things that are important for safety while still allowing that intensification. Right now, we live out in suburbia, right? So we're in this big McMansion house. It's probably 2,400 square feet. I think the last one we were living in before that was 3,000 square feet. And it's not that uncommon to have like two people living in those houses, whether they're retirees or a young couple. And for a lot of them, one, the houses aren't designed to really allow for ease of use if you want to duplex it. But at the same time, that's how we have a lot of the existing apartment rental stock here in London, right? In a lot of the older neighborhoods, what people did was take those big houses, big mansions, subdivide them into multiple units. In fact, in the past, I've sold these properties now, but I owned two different sixplexes that originally would have been a single house. And essentially over time, people subdivided them into smaller apartments, bachelor apartments, things of that nature. And if you can take a house, a large house, and turn it into 6 apartment units, that actually has a huge impact on a lot of different things. So one, obviously, the more rental stock available, as there's more rental units competing for the same number of renters, you're going to actually see rental prices have pressured downward rather than upward. Whereas when you remove existing rental stock, and this is often what we see when new codes pass, when rental licenses, things of that nature come into play from a real estate investor's perspective, immediately we start to see the rental stock shrink. And so we've really got this 1-2 punch when it comes to NIMBYs. One, they don't want people to build in the outliers of the city, right? So they want to see a city kind of contained into a certain footprint. And then 2, they also don't want to see any sort of densification occurring in their local neighborhood. So they don't want to see the mid-rise developments, and they don't want to see their neighbors adding an additional apartment or suite to their existing house. Now, I know a lot of people, when they hear us talking about adding rental stock, they kind of question or wonder, how is this really going to impact the affordability of housing? Well, one, from just the average consumer or the average retail buyer's perspective, if you're able to buy a house or buy a house that already has a secondary suite, that can be your rental helper, right? Like that can really help you when it comes to that rental income, can help you to paying off the mortgage or being able to make your monthly payments. At the same time, each person that chooses to become a renter is one less buyer. And so if you've got a lot more rental units, as well as a lot larger variety of rental units. So right now, if you wanted to live in my neighborhood, essentially you'd have to rent a whole house or buy a whole house because there's no duplexes here. Essentially, both the way the zoning's designed, often very restrictive. Now, again, we do have certain rules in Ontario that on the provincial level that kind of massage things and allow you to get that secondary suite. But if we were to make it a lot easier for individuals to be able to get secondary suites, if we started allowing builders and developers to design properties more geared towards this, and we became less restrictive when it comes to zoning, you would actually see a plethora of new rental units come on the market. Again, every single person that's a renter isn't a buyer, and this can alleviate pressure on the buying side of the real estate transactions as well. Now, again, I'm not saying that you could just solve everything without building more. You absolutely do need to build more. But if we can build more while also allowing intensification in regards to density, particularly allowing existing properties to be converted. Again, right now I'm really focused on residential real estate. But again, if we opened up commercial and office space and allowed that to be converted into residential real estate as well, again, that's going to increase that's going to create a lot more stock when it comes to rental units, and potentially you could even make condominiums out of those larger buildings, right? So think about all the empty office space that currently exists because of COVID, social distancing, quarantines, lockdowns, and all that crazy shit. Again, damn, I keep meaning not to say those words because it just gets me demonetized on YouTube. So at least if you guys are enjoying this, give me a thumbs up, show us a little love in the comment section. But it's really important to understand that real estate investors like myself, I see Mike Rosehart's in the comment section as well. Like Mike Rosehart, we would love to add additional rental units, right? If the cities were willing to work with us more towards actually being able to subdivide existing housing stock into multiple units, you would see just a huge boom in residential real estate being converted into multifamily real estate. And again, I understand why a lot of people on the surface don't think that this is going to make a big impact. But if even say 10% of the existing housing stock, the single family was able to add a duplex unit, that the amount of time it would take to build that development, to build a new apartment building, to be able to add that from another source is a much longer timeline than having a whole bunch of different individuals converting their individual properties into adding additional rental stock to the market. Same thing goes with boarding houses. So again, I know boarding houses, rooming houses, all those different things aren't that popular, but I understand each person that's not allowed to live in a rooming house or boarding house that would prefer that because either it's cheaper or they prefer the lifestyle or whatever the case may be, they then have to go out and rent a full apartment. And again, that creates more pressure on the rental stock. And as you see more pressure on the rental stock, that's either going to push people into staying at home, living with their parents, or push them into becoming buyers faster. And so I think it's really important that just politicians start being honest with us. And so all these random promises they make about we're going to add 1 million houses, affordable houses over the next 3 years. Do you guys understand how long it takes to even do a development? Like, even if you had shovel-ready projects, the odds of you being able to execute on all those different projects is very low, in my opinion. And I think just anyone that's got experience, right? Have you seen what's going on with our supply chain? Right now, we literally have to buy appliances months in advance because of the microchip shortages and all the other crazy shit going on with our supply chain here. The price of lumber fluctuates daily, the way that you expect a meme stock to almost fluctuate at this point in time. And so again, it's really important that politicians start being honest with us. And so again, the federal government in and of itself can't control this. What they need to be doing is working with the provinces and actually the municipal governments as well. Because again, a lot of municipal governments will fight intensification tooth and nail because they're afraid of it costing them votes. And oftentimes the individuals that this policy would be best for simply don't understand what's at stake here. And so when they hear, the NIMBYs chanting like, not in my backyard, I don't want a garage suite, I don't want to see a laneway or a carriage home or a garden suite, whatever you want to name it as, again, what they're doing is actually denying people the opportunity for more rental stock. That actually has significant impacts. The hoops that Colby has to jump through in cities like Barrie right now, it discourages individuals from wanting to invest into those projects. As you discourage those individuals, they eventually give up and they either go after different types of projects, they put their capital elsewhere. And again, what we've done is create a whole set of policies that are really just to the detriment of both individual property owners, to renters, as well as buyers. And this is something where we don't need the government to spend a shit ton of money in order to create the solution. We literally just need the government to give us more permission over our individual properties and the ability to subdivide them to create that intensification from a density standpoint. So when we're talking about NIMBYs, I really hope you guys aren't the NIMBY in your own backyard. And yet I suspect a lot of people watching this might nod along and be like, yeah, that sounds like a decent policy, Matt. But if tomorrow your neighbor was to try and convert their existing house into a duplex or their duplex into a fourplex, would you freak the shit out? And if so, why? And realistically, why, right? I think far too often people just have an emotional reaction. I bought in this neighborhood because it was single family houses and I assumed it was always going to be single family houses. Well, I mean, probably 20 years ago, it was a field then. Should we just assume because something was a field once, it has to stay a field forever? And this is one of the issues we see with like green belts as well. And so what happens is when you create these green belts around cities, I'm not saying they're good or bad, but I understand when we create these green belts around cities and then we don't, ease up on our zoning restrictions, what we're doing is just creating a perfect recipe for a crazy housing and rental crisis. And so again, this isn't something where the government has to write $1 billion check tomorrow to solve this issue. This can literally just be working with the provincial and municipal governments to actually allow homeowners to be able to earn some money from their properties or to invest into their properties to create more rental stock. And again, that needs to go part and parcel with more developments and things of that nature. But again, the same way when we talk about, building 1 million new homes, well, those houses still have a certain cost basis, right? Like wood still costs a certain amount. Labor costs like double what it used to cost. But again, these things still have certain costs associated with them where unless the government's just going to give away free houses, and that doesn't end well, guys. I won't get too deep into the politics here, but look at other communities maybe where people don't have to buy their houses. Look at other communities where people are kind of given houses or their local municipal governments kind of ease them into housing. And I think that you'll find that they don't have the same care. They don't have the same respect for those properties. And those properties have a tendency to deteriorate a lot faster. And what happens when a property deteriorates past the point of no return and you outlaw things like flipping, like the liberals kind of want to do? Well, that actually just eventually disappears from the housing stock because it no longer is appropriate for any individual, right? And what I mean by that is like right now, when they want to essentially demonize, as well as potentially like just make it hard or difficult or more expensive or tax the ability for flippers to flip, it's an oversimplification. I understand you watch one video on HGTV, someone says they made $200,000 on their flip. One, when you look at those numbers, I think you kind of have to look at them skeptically because they never really break down line by line for us what's going on. But beyond that, even if these flippers are getting rich doing this, they're still providing a service to their general community. And one of the things we need to understand is a lot of home buyers, a lot of first-time home buyers, they can't afford or they can't take on these bigger projects when it comes to buying a house. So understand when you get to buy from a flipper and that property is turnkey, you can actually mortgage essentially the entire cost of the renovations. So if we're looking at a $400,000 property and it needs $50,000 in renovations, well, if I'm going to buy it as a first-time home buyer, I need to come up with my 5% down, but then I need the 50 grand for my renovations. And then I have to try and go through the refinance process, but I've already got CMHC on the property. It actually becomes quite a complicated, a ball of wax for us to unravel. Whereas if I'm buying off a flipper for $500,000 and they even make a 10% profit, $50,000 in this made up example, well, actually, all I need is $25,000 down to meet that 5% down payment. So literally in the one scenario, right, buying for $400,000, I need $20,000 there plus $50,000 for my renovations. That's $70,000 total out of pocket. Or I could use $25,000 and buy that turnkey property. Again, that actually makes it more affordable for the average person that's looking to buy a house or get into their first house. The other aspect, though, is if you don't allow flippers to exist, a lot of first-time buyers, a lot of retail buyers, they can't afford or they don't even understand the ability to get private mortgages. And so when we're looking at houses that are uninhabitable from the bank's perspective, that means you got a hole in your roof that's leaking severely, you don't have a kitchen, you don't have a bathroom or anything else like that. And while you may not see those houses every day, investors like myself and Mike Rosehart, when we're active in the market, yeah, we see them all the time. I've seen properties that had the water turned off for years, right? Like this stuff does happen, houses that haven't been winterized properly and things of that nature. And no retail buyer can actually afford to go in and buy it cash, or they don't understand how to finesse the private lending market. And so again, they're not able to set themselves up for success, which ends up meaning that property just continues to deteriorate until it gets to the point of being torn down. At that point in time, maybe someone comes in, does an expensive infill project. Whereas if you would have actually just allowed flippers to do their thing, they would have fixed it up, turned it around, sold it to another retail buyer. So I'm not saying that intensification and allowing density is going to be the only solution that we need from a housing and affordability crisis here in Canada, but it's actually one of the big weapons in our arsenal that I never hear people talking about, that I never hear politicians using as a stump speech. I think for two reasons. One, you're not immediately like saying, I'm going to write a check to solve this. And it turns out politicians really like that as the solution, probably because it's not coming out of their checkbook, I suspect, but who knows? And the other factor is like, it doesn't immediately, you don't get a ribbon cutting ceremony, right? You don't get a stand with new houses behind you. And again, like look into some of those photo ops that Trudeau and other politicians are doing. They're often in $1 million neighborhoods, cutting a ribbon, saying how they're creating affordable housing. I'm not sure if that really jives from my perspective. But again, what we don't want, in my opinion, and I hope you guys agree with me here, is government to solve all of our problems. What we want is for the government to get out of our way so us individuals can actually go solve our own problems. And that's where allowing more flexibility on local zoning will actually create the opportunities for individuals to start solving the housing and affordability crisis versus just governments throwing money at it. Because you know what happens when governments throw money at it? Different consultants come in, different agencies, and everyone's just taking a small little piece of the puzzle. And by the time everyone gets a taste of that money, we end up with almost nothing left. And then all of a sudden we're like, we got a couple of houses, we'll give them away to someone and we'll move on to the next campaign promise that is broken as well. And to me, it's just so frustrating because let's say that any one of the parties, I think one promised 500,000 houses over the next 10 years, one promised 1.5 million or 1.2 million or 1.4 it was over the next 4 years, and one promised 1 million over 3 years. even if you could somehow magically snap your fingers and do that, what's next? Are you just going to keep promising more and more houses and throw more and more money at this problem? Or eventually, are we going to allow people to actually, take on and become enterprising individuals, subdivide their homes, create garden suites, carriage lane homes, whatever you want to call it, as well as allowing more development, right? And so again, understand when cities aren't allowed to annex land, when they're not allowed to grow, then the only option is to grow up, right, with density. And yet we end up with this NIMBYism where people want these green belts around their city, but they also don't want high rises in their backyard. You literally can't have it both ways. Well, you can, but you then can't have affordability. This is like that old saying, you can have it, done well, done fast, or done cheap, but you just can't pick all three. Maybe you can get away with two. These days, though, with our supply chain, you're probably lucky to get away with one. But it is important that we go into this eyes wide open. I think most of you guys are real estate investors. You maybe understand where I'm coming from, but it's important that we also hold our politicians accountable, because we know that money is just going to disappear into the ether to consultants. It's never actually going to see its way to making the massive impact that they promise for us. And instead, if they would actually just get out of our goddamn way and allow us to take the wheel here, we'd actually go crazy, right? You give a guy like Mike Rosehart the opportunity to subdivide houses into multiple units, and it's a simple process. Again, it can still be done safe and be simple. Allow him to go wild. All of a sudden, in a year, he might create 100 new rental units where there wasn't 100 new rental units before. Same with myself. There'd be huge opportunities here, and we would see capital and investment flow into the opportunity to turn these into multifamily dwellings. But instead, we just want to hear empty promises from government and, do a nice little golf clap when they announce it. To me, it rings so hollow. And these are the same campaign promises you hear every year. And it's just when are we all going to admit that we don't believe or trust these individuals to be able to actually change the housing situation here? And again, I know it's popular to want to go after foreign investors and things of that nature. You understand, foreign investors that are bringing massive amounts of capital over here, they're kind of sophisticated. They might even be successful, right? That's maybe how they got all their massive amounts of capital. Well, I suspect that those individuals are smart enough to figure out workarounds around whatever random legislation you put in place. And while it may deter a handful of individuals, understand that still doesn't really solve the issue. Having a lot more housing stock, having a lot more rental stock, that actually could move the needle. And so it's just unfortunate to me that at best we see politicians giving fake promises to one side of the equation while ignoring allowing the density to be increased, because honestly, that's the only solution I see that's practical. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, smash the like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. I'll quickly check out some of these comments. Jump in the comments if you've got an opinion you want to share. Mike Rosehart's trolling here. 2,400 square foot is a big McMansion these days. Absolutely, Mike. Go back to 1950, and what was it? About 800 square feet was the average family home, and they had more people per capita in their individual homes. So that, yeah, 2,400 is an insane amount of space for a single family, in my opinion. And again, people need to be more open to alternative living circumstances. I think that one of the greatest sacrifices we've made, and this isn't a good type of sacrifice, one of the greatest sacrifices we've made as a society is really vilifying the idea of intergenerational living. Not only is it an affordable thing to do, but I think it's a beneficial thing to do for a lot of people. Young children growing up with their grandparents, that's not a bad thing. Young children growing up with their aunts and uncles or things of that nature, again, I don't understand why it's such a bad idea, in my opinion. And I know you're just kind of trolling me there, Mike, but what's Benjamin saying here? I'm in the process to put a house onto a new ICF basement on an acreage. It takes way longer than expected. Material shortages as well as contractors are taking their sweet time. Frustrating. Absolutely. And sometimes, again, in these unusual circumstances, it may even be outside of the hands of your contractors, right? They might be like, hey, I don't know, they just changed the rules again. I'm going to have to read up and figure out if we're still allowed to do this shit. And that you know, I don't know. I naturally think of like Wayne's World or other movies in the 1980s and 90s where people are playing like road hockey. It's like car. It's literally every time the government changes the rules, they're yelling car and stopping the game of commerce. And every time they do that, there are serious consequences, both to our supply chain, but as well to our ability to provide this affordable housing that everyone wants to see, but no one's actually willing to put in the work or the policy to allow us to get to accomplish. KMR saying, used to be development fees were exempt during a 10-year period. That's why Waterloo has all the high rises now. Now they nail like $20K per unit and just in application fees. Yeah, and again, what governments what federal governments should really be doing is trying to work with the municipal governments, either help them craft policy that's going to actually solve some of the issues we've got, or maybe we need to educate the local politicians at the municipal level about why not just caving into every NIMBY is a very important stance. Because far too often, I think that unfortunately the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so what this looks like is one developer wants to build density. All the neighbors around them just want to bitch and complain about how that might impact their property values. Hey, you made 25% in the last year. What are you so stressed about? Appreciate everyone in the comments section. And yeah, just really glad that you guys are following along. Smash the like button, hit subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.
We're releasing a video every single day in 2020. We're going to become the content kings of Canadian real estate.